We begin Unit 13, Graphing Rational Expressions. We will be talking about domain and vertical and horizontal asymptotes. The domain of a rational function is all real numbers, except the ones that make the denominator equal 0. To find those values, set the denominator equal to 0 and solve. You may need to factor the denominator to find all excluded values. We write this as D for domain, colon, the real number symbol, comma, x not equal to some number. We read this, the domain is all real numbers except when x is equal to. An asymptote is a line that a graph will approach. A vertical asymptote is a vertical line that acts as boundaries to the graph. If there are no common factors, you will find a vertical asymptote at all your excluded domain values. They are written as equations of vertical lines. We write the vertical asymptote, VA, colon, x is equal to some number. A rational function may have at most one horizontal asymptote. If the degree, which is the highest power of x, of the numerator is less than the degree of the denominator, then y equals 0 is the horizontal asymptote. Example: my degree in the numerator is 1. My degree in the denominator is 2. The 1 is less than 2. The numerator is less than the denominator. Therefore, we have a horizontal asymptote of y equals 0. If the degree of the numerator is equal to the degree of the denominator, then y equals a over b is the horizontal asymptote. A and b are the coefficients of the highest power. In this case, my numerator is 2, my denominator is 2. These are equal. Therefore, my horizontal asymptote is my coefficient over my coefficient, my leading coefficient. So 2 divided by 1 is 2. So my horizontal asymptote is 2. Y equals 2. If the degree of the numerator is greater than the degree of the denominator, then the graph has no horizontal asymptote. Here, my numerator is 2, my denominator is 1, my numerator is greater than the degree of my denominator. I have no horizontal asymptote. Example 1. Let's find the domain first. To find the domain, we need to set our denominator equal to 0 and solve. So x is equal to -2. If we put -2 in for x, we get 0 in the denominator. You cannot divide by 0. So therefore, my domain cannot be -2. So we write this as all real numbers, but where x is -2. So x cannot be -2. Now look at the vertical asymptote. The vertical asymptote is where x is equal to -2. The horizontal asymptote, we look at the highest degrees. The highest degree in the numerator is 1. the highest degree in the denominator is 1. Those are equal. When the highest degree on the top is equal to the highest degree on the bottom, then y is equal to a over b, which is 1 over 1, which is equal to 1. So y is equal to 1. In this case, my a is 1 and my b is 1. Example 2. It's important that we factor the denominator in order to be able to find the domain. The factors to x squared plus 2x minus 3 are x plus 3 and x minus 1. We set each factor equal to 0 and solve. So we get x is equal to negative 3 and x is equal to 1. Or the domain is all real numbers except negative 3 and 1. The vertical asymptotes are x is equal to negative 3 and x is equal to 1. The highest degree in the numerator is a 1. The highest degree in the denominator is 2. 1 is less than 2, so the numerator is less than the denominator. Remember, if the numerator is less than the denominator, then the horizontal asymptote is y equals 0. Example 3. To find the domain, we set the denominator equal to 0 and solve. So x is equal to 3. The domain is all real numbers, but x is not equal to 3. The vertical asymptote is x equals to 3. Now looking at the horizontal asymptote, my highest degree in the numerator is a 2. The highest degree in the denominator is a 1. The numerator is greater than the denominator. So therefore, if the degree of the numerator is greater than the degree of the denominator, then the graph has no horizontal asymptote. Example 4. Set the denominator equal to 0 and solve. My domain is all real numbers except where x is equal to negative 2. So it's every number but negative 2. That's what makes this equal to 0. My vertical asymptote is x equals negative 2. Horizontal asymptote. The highest degree on the numerator is a 1. The highest degree in the denominator is also a 1. These are equal. When the degree of the numerator equals the degree of the denominator, then my horizontal asymptote is y equals a over b. My a is 2 and my b is 1. So the horizontal asymptote is y equals 2. Example 5. Set the denominator equal to 0 to find the domain. X is equal to 0. 0 is what makes the denominator 0, so that cannot be our domain. So all real numbers except when x is equal to 0. The vertical asymptote is x equals 0, and the horizontal asymptote n is 3, the denominator is 2. So the numerator, is greater than the denominator. So when the numerator is greater than the denominator, there is no horizontal asymptote. Example 6. It's important to factor the denominator because we need to set each equal to 0 to find what makes this equal to 0. X is equal to -5 and x is equal to 4. The domain is all real numbers except when x is equal to -5 and when x is equal to 4. My vertical asymptotes are x equals -5 and x equals 4. A horizontal asymptote, the numerator is 1, the denominator is 2. The numerator is less than the denominator. When the numerator is less than the denominator, then the horizontal asymptote is y equals 0. This concludes Flap 1 of your Unit 13 foldable.